Hi, so what we're going to be looking at today on paper 2 with regards to research methods is reporting on psychological investigations. So if you remember when we looked at peer review, we looked at how research is decided on which is to be recommended for publication. We're now going to look at how these articles, these pieces of research are set out, and it's in a standardised format. Okay, so in your booklets, if you can turn please to page 72, and if you can also just put above your heading reporting on psychological investigations week 6, and it's the week beginning the 11th of May 2020. So if we can keep doing that with our lessons, so we know when we get back to college when you have done a lesson on these. Okay, so again, you'll need a highlighter and a pen to be making notes as you're going alongside as well. Okay, so let's make a start. So first of all, before we go and look at the sections, when you carry out research and you are writing it up, there is a standardised format that psychologists use, and it's generally the same standard and format for most other scientific subjects as well. So before you even start writing it up, you need to think about how you're going to write it. So first of all, it should be written in the third person. You would never say I. So when I have a go at you for putting I think in the essays that you do, just don't do that. We don't do that as psychologists, and it's getting you ready to become a psychologist as well. If you choose to do that in the future, or any research field, you would never say I think. So it's always in the third person. So the researcher, for example, and the language should be formal and technical key terms used throughout. So that is why we reinforce that every single lesson, because you are studying a scientific subject. Again, the visual format is very important as well, but this can vary from university to university. And universities, when you're carrying out research, your dissertation at undergraduate level might want you to follow a certain format. So you just stick to whatever they tell you. So this is just a bit of a background. You don't need to know this bit for the exam, but it's just to prepare you for the future as well. So for example, at university, my professors required that the font be Arial. Some professors wanted it in Times New Roman, but for the dissertation it was Arial. It had to be size 12, and the spacing in between was 1.5 lines, because in the olden days when I was at university, the professors needed that space to be able to write underneath it and make comments. Okay, so remember what we talked about in peer review for those readjustments, those resubmissions. That is why we need those spaces in between, and also justified as well. Okay, so the format is that the edges of your published work are balanced are the same. Okay, so for example, I've not balanced it here though, it's just the format of the slide. I'm very sorry about that. This is similar to what mine looked at. Okay, so I'll let you read through that through yourselves, because it's not something that you actually need for the exam, but just the experiences that I went through as well. It can vary, like I say, between universities, but just stick to what your university asks for. However, let's have a look at what we need to know for our A-levels. Okay, so if you can turn again to page 72, if you've not already left it at that page, to get our research published, psychologists need to follow a standard format, like I said before, of writing up the research, and it's an accepted manner throughout the scientific university world, really. You're basically communicating to your readers what was done, how it was carried out, what your results were, and if you need to carry out or would like to carry out, most research does this, any future research based on your original findings. If you look in your booklet there, you'll see that there are 8 bullet points, and this is the order that is stuck to. Okay, so you'd have your title of your work, and and your title there in your booklet, it's basically telling the reader what it is about. It's very concise. It doesn't go into a lot of detail, just like a title on a project that you would have done at school or in college. The second part is the abstract. Now, the abstract gives a brief summary of everything. It's roughly about 150 words long, and it includes certain things. And you might think, how can you condense what I'm going to tell you about into a small amount? But there is a reason why, as psychologists, we do this. So after your heading, after your title, you'll know about what the aim of the research was, the hypotheses, briefly the method, briefly the results, and conclusions. Now, the reason I like abstracts, and especially when I was at university, again in the olden days, is because it saved me, when I was doing my dissertation, reading through hundreds of journal articles which are 20,000, 30,000 words long, and you don't need it to back up what you're researching. So what it does is it gives the reader a brief summary, and you can decide, is this work relevant to what I'm researching, or generally what you've got an interest in. It's to find the most relevant reports to read in full. And now these are online, the abstracts are online, and again, in the past you did have to order journal articles from the British Library and have them sent to you at university and posted if they didn't have the relevant journal articles in the library. Now you can read abstracts online, and most universities now you will have access to journal articles free online as well, and I'm going to show you some examples of that in a bit later on. Okay, if you turn over now in your booklet, you should be on page 73. The abstract, just going back to the abstract, that is written right at the end of the research. Probably one of the first things that you're going to do is develop a hypothesis. And then you would start looking at the introduction, so finding background research which supports your aim and your hypotheses, and you will have more than one generally when you're carrying out a larger research piece. Okay, you'll see in your booklet there, and I would highlight that a funnel technique is used. So when you are getting the background research into the topic areas that you are interested in, or research fields, that you're interested in, you would research general topic areas, get journal articles on that, and then near the end of the introduction, your background research, and it's like an essay really, would focus on specific journal articles. Okay, so you might have an interest in a certain field, say phobias for example, and at the start of the introduction you would just have some background research into explanations of phobias. So that could be classical conditioning, and then you might want to look at specific phobias as part of your hypothesis. So arachnophobia, the fear of spiders. So near the end of your introduction, when you're referring back to other research, you would be looking at specific research into phobias and arachnophobia. You get really specific and focus on a specific explanation. So it would be phobias, arachnophobia, and then the classical conditioning explanation of phobias. So when you look at examples later on, that will make more sense. And right at the end of your introduction, so like I say, it's a bit like an essay, it's the funnel technique, and right at the end of the essay you will have your aims and hypotheses, including the null hypotheses as well. Okay, so let's move on to the method. Okay, so in the method part of writing up a psychological investigation, again, we follow a set format. Now, just to make you aware, in the exam, you could be asked to design a piece of research. It's usually about 10 marks long, and we will look at that in more detail when we come back after summer. Going back to the abstract, you could be asked to write an abstract. You could be asked what is the purpose of an abstract, and you could be asked what is an abstract. So we will be looking at that more with exam skills next week when we recap the exam questions. But let's focus on the method now. So in the method, again, if you're on page 73, your method should be in enough detail so that anybody within the scientific field of psychology can replicate it. It's got to be in that much detail. It's got to be accurate. So the first part, if you look in your booklet there, is design. Okay, so you've got to include in that as well is the type of method used. So was it a lab experiment, was it a field experiment, etc. The type of design as well. So was it repeated measures, independent groups? You've also got to include there as well is the groups that you used, the conditions that you used, the number of participants, the IV and the DV, you've got to include that in there as well. And remember, as always with your variables, they have to be fully operationalized, and you've got to explain that there as well. So how are your variables being measured? So in the exam, if you're asked to write up a design, you've got to think of all these factors as well, and we will practice that a lot, so please don't worry about that. You've also got to include your participants and how you got those participants as well. So the sampling technique used, who the participants were, gender if relevant, ethnicity if relevant, etc. That has got to be included, because if somebody else wants to repeat your research, they need to know who the sample is. The last bit is your apparatus or equipment or materials, as it's known as. The official scientific term would be apparatus. So are you using questionnaires? Are you using any computer equipment? Are you using any scanning machines? Say if you're looking at an area in biopsychology. Also as well in the exam, and it tells you they're in bold in your booklet, you could be asked to write standardized instructions. Now with standardized instructions, you've got to write them as though you are the researcher there. So for example, it would be, I would like you to sit in this room, and if we use the example from eyewitness testimony, watch a video of this car crash, and can you tell me how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Okay, so when you're writing those standardized instructions and an information sheet as well, it's got to be as though you're reading it out, as it says in your booklet, formally to the participants. Then we have the procedure, and again, you could be asked to write this in the exam, and this is where you've got to think on your feet, and we will practice this a lot. It's step by step what you did as a researcher, and it's a lot of detail. It's what you did in the method. There's no results or anything here. It's just step by step what you did, including if you, well, most people will carry out a pilot study there, and also the ethical considerations. Now, you might say, well, there's no ethical considerations in my research. There is always ethical considerations, okay? So informed consent, you would ask other researchers, do you think participants would be happy to carry out this research? Are the participants leaving your research in the same state, emotional state and physical state that they arrived? All research has a debrief, all research does. So when you are asked to write up certain sections of this, or at university when you're carrying out research, there will always be ethical issues to consider. Okay, now if we just move on. Sorry. What we're going to be looking at now is in more detail how you would look at the design and method. So just a quick recap. For example, is it an independent groups, naturalistic observation, your sample and your participants, apparatus and equipment, your procedure, how you carried it out. And also, please don't forget, you've got to note for how you've controlled the extraneous variables, and mentioned at the end, ethical considerations. Okay, and if there were any ethical problems, how did you deal with them? Now the results section, again, if we look at this in the exam, bottom of page, in the booklet, bottom of page 73, for the exam, you could be asked to write up a results section, and again, we will be practicing these, and you've already done quite a bit of this already. So what the results do, first of all, is they summarise the key findings, and this will be in different formats. So first of all, we look at descriptive statistics. So at the bottom of the page there, this is where it's your basic data. So your measures of central tendency, such as the mean, median and mode, the measures of dispersion, such as the range and the standard deviation. You would put graphs in here, which are relevant, so bar charts if you've looked at differences, correlation if you've looked at relationships, for example. So that would be one section of the results. And you could be asked to draw bar charts, graphs. You've practiced this already. You could be asked to interpret them, and again, you have practiced that already. You could be asked to calculate measures of central tendency and dispersion. Again, we've practiced that. You don't have to, just be careful with the standard deviation. You only need to know what the purpose is with regards to a results section. Okay, for the exam. Inferential statistics we haven't looked at yet, but we will be looking at those when we come back in September. And these are measures which look at the data in more detail. So these will tell us if our results are statistically significant. So are they accurate to a certain level? So the level of significance, what we usually aim for in psychology, is P 0.05, equal to or less than, What that means is we allow for a 5% chance of error. Now, don't worry too much about that just yet. We will be looking at that more in September. And this tells us whether we can support or reject our hypotheses. Okay, now in the results section, it's not always going to be numerical. A lot of researchers will carry out qualitative research, so that would be data from case studies, it would be data from interview transcripts or open-ended questionnaires or diary accounts. So the results section is not always quantitative. But for exam purposes, they generally would ask about statistics, but not always. But if you're asked to write something up or do a graph, obviously that would be statistical. Okay, the discussion part is basically where you're evaluating your work here. So at the first part of the discussion, and we're now on page 74, you were moving on from your results, so you're explaining the results in a written format now. So you're looking at whether the results support the aim, the hypothesis, does it support research, going way back to the introduction that you've talked about, so others research, and if not, that's absolutely fine. You don't always have to support your hypothesis. Most of the time your results may not support your hypothesis, but you discuss that. Okay. So, any limitations as well of your research, and all research has limitations. Don't think, oh, my research is wonderful. Yes, it will be, but everybody's research can always be improved. And you would suggest here how you would address that. So what would you do to improve your research? And the last point in a discussion section, for me personally, and this is personal, it's really what psychological research is all about. Does your research make a contribution to humankind? Can we use your research to help others? Can we use it to promote future research? Can it be used to help? So that would be the last part of the discussion section. Now, something that you could be asked to do in the exam is to reference work, and this has come up previously where you were given a title, information about a book, and you're going to have a look at that as part of your homework, and you were asked to write a reference section, and it is in a particular format all of the time. Top tip, when you're getting your introduction ready, always note down, save it on your PC, laptop, the books and the page numbers that you've used. Don't leave this till last because you will forget. It's taken from me. I did that once before. I couldn't remember certain books and it took me quite a long time to find out where I'd got the research from. So do this right at the beginning of the process. Start referencing as part of that introduction section. Okay, so if we look on page 74 now, you've got that example there of a journal article. So Miller, comma, his initials, capital G, full stop, A, full stop. The year it was published in brackets, full stop, and you'll recognise this research, we've looked at this in memory. The magical number 7 plus or minus 2, some limits on our capacity for processing information, full stop, psychology review, and the number of the review, which was 63, and the page numbers there. Okay, now if it's a journal article reference, you will always stick to that format. For website references, if we turn over, that is slightly different. So you would have the Psychology Today, for example, 2017, if we turn over. First memories, and then available at, so the website link that you got it from, and when you access that as well, that's really important to add. Now, the last few times in the exam we've seen a book reference. Now, you obviously can get books online now, but it is still a book, so you'd reference it in this way. It is always the surname first, then the initial, full stop, the year it was published in brackets, not necessarily the year it was written, the year it was published, the title of the book, and where it was published, so for example London, and then after a colon you would put the publisher, so for example Hodder Stoughton, and then full stop. So have a go at practicing those, and you will practice one of those with one of the exam questions. Okay, the last bit is the appendices. Top tip when you're carrying out research, when you go into university, while you're carrying out your dissertation, don't throw anything away. Have a tub or a box where you will keep original questionnaires, interviews, consent forms, debrief forms, your raw data. In the olden days, we had to do statistical calculations on paper. We did eventually get SPSS, which is a computer program to calculate data, which is in most universities now. I don't know what version they're up to. I think when we started it was version 8. That shows how long ago it was. But you don't have to put every single interview transcript you've carried out, or questionnaires, or every single debrief form. It's just examples of this. Okay, so for example, one questionnaire, one debrief form, etc. Okay. Again, for the exam, you would need to know what an appendices is, and you could be asked what is included in it. Okay. There is somebody else who's done quite a summarised revision video on this, so please look at this website, it's on YouTube. The lessons are really concise, so just for a quick revision video where they're literally just talking through, you're not saying page numbers in your booklets and all that. I quite like these on YouTube, so you have got the link on the instructions that I sent as well, and it's also on the other PowerPoint, which is all together. These are just separate lesson PowerPoints. And again, this is on your instructions. You can click on the link. You can have a look at original psychological reports. I've sent you Milgram's original psychological report, which you can have a look at as well. But on the BMC psychology, there are more up-to-date pieces of research. You can look at areas that you're interested in that we haven't looked at yet. So please have a look at those as well if you're interested in that. And your exam questions are on the instructions as well, but again, they are just here for you as well. So I hope again this lesson has been of some use. Sorry, it is just me talking, we've not got activities, but there is an abstract activity that you could carry out, which I've designed. Again, you do not have to print out this worksheet. You can just type up the answers, write it out on paper. Do not be printing anything extra out unless you want to. So now you can follow the instructions on the Word document or on the PowerPoint as well, and I hope this has helped. Stay safe.